In this video we're going to talk about the other supports that we could use to do our works. Since we have already seen the two most used by far, the canvas and the wood, here to complete our discussion on the supports, we're going to discuss briefly the other types that can be used. As we said, in this course we are mainly going to use canvases, but if we find difficult to get them or we want to try something different, here we will find some other option that quite easily we can prepare by ourselves. With the only exception for the paper, all the other materials that we're going to see are rigid, and they represent more or less a good alternative to the wooden panels. At the end, we're going to see quickly some examples on how we should process them before we use them. To answer the request of quality standardization that the growing furniture industry had, they have developed many different types of board that could represent an alternative to the very problematic but more prized solid wood. They started at the end of the 18th century when they have invented the plywood, and from then it has been a continued development of new boards up to our days, where we can find on the market many different types of fiberboards. For example, particle boards, MDF, and R boards. The particle board is carried out industrially by mixing and pressing small wooden chips and resin. According to the size of the chips and the type and quantity of resin used in production, we can find different types. The most important division is between the standard and the moisture resistant. For our application, we should use the moisture resistant with small grains, and in this case I will definitely cover it with some canvas. The MDF or middle density fiberboard is a more recent alternative to the particle board. It's produced by pressing in high temperature very small fibers of wood with resin, water and wax in different concentrations. It's available in standard or moisture-resistant version. And also in this case, I would use for our application the moisture-resistant covered with some canvas. Another type of fiberboard used in oil painting is the hardboard or HDF, high density fiberboard, sometimes also known as masonite. This type of fiberboard has been used in oil painting since the first half of the last century. It's produced by pressing fine wooden fibers in high temperatures, sometimes adding some resin. It can be treated with linseed oil or acrylic primer, and if we like it, we can cover it with some canvas. Although they are not considered good supports, cardboard and paper can also be used in oil painting. I honestly don't think that we should never use them, but they can be considered a valid option for beginners or to make our studies before we do the final works. The paper used in this case should be thick and very porous, capable to absorb our oils. If we want to make it more robust, preliminary we can treat it with some acrylic primer and even cover it with some canvas. The paper, no matter if normal or covered with some canvas, isn't a rigid support, and without a frame to hold it in a proper shape, over time it tends to get wavy. If we want to paint on a more rigid support, we have to use some cardboard. In order to be able to paint directly on it, we want it to be porous. In alternative, we can treat it with some acrylic primer and eventually cover it with some canvas. In this second case, if we want, we can also use a normal piece of common sandwich cardboard used for the boxes. The only problem is that it's a little bit wavy. But as we said, it's still a good solution for beginners that want to follow this course or to do our studies. There are also other supports that have been used and can be used for oil painting. For example, copper and aluminum plates, PVC, leather, and several others. It's time now to see how to process the fiberboards if we decide to use them. As well as the wooden boards, they can be processed in several ways. Here, we're going to do it in the same way we did with the wood before, using some acrylic primer. If we choose the panel in the right way, normally with this type of support we don't need to do any preliminary filling job. Eventually, if we want, we can smooth the corners a little bit using some sandpaper. Starting from the back, we're going to prime our board. Then, as we did before, we're going to do the sides, and then we're going to end on the front. If we have time, also in this case, we should let the board dry for at least 24 hours before we give a new layer. Since this type of boards are designed to be veneered, my suggestion at this point is to cover the panel with some canvas. So, as we did before, we're going to give a rich layer of primer. We are going to cover our board with some canvas, and at the end, we're going to prime it. We'll let it dry, as always, if we have time, for at least 24 hours, and then we're going to give a second layer. Also in this case, we can use as many layers of primer as we want, as far as we process both front and back in the same way. As we said, cardboard and paper shouldn't be used for the final painting, so the fastest way is to use them as they come. But we can decide to process them with a couple of layers of acrylic primer, and if we want, we can cover them with some canvas. In this case, they last longer. To cover the cardboard, in both cases standard and sandwich, we are going to follow the same method that we have used for the wood and the fiberboards. Also in this case, we have to remember to prime front and back in the same way. And with this last suggestion, we have concluded our discussion on the supports. If you enjoyed this video, we will really appreciate if you could click on like and subscribe to our channel. It will also help us very much if you could leave a comment. Thank you for watching this video, and see you in the next one.